Aujourd'hui, je vais parler de that time-honored 4% rule as a safe withdrawal rate in early retirement. In 2024, all of a sudden I hear it's back, because for just a few prior, it was all 4% rule is dead. My God, how did this rule resurrect itself within such a short amount of time? So yeah, we're gonna get into it. Hey, XenPuck here. So, another day not working for anybody but myself. I mean, if you count these vastly underproduced videos as, work, okay, this is definitely not work. You guys know, if you've seen this and heard my totally unhinged and unfocused rants, I am trying to do better. I am, seriously. So today's topic is simple, right? Everyone who's into the idea of FIRE has heard of the 4% rule, right? This is the gold standard for how much of your portfolio you can live off of every year, right? It's based on some big study that takes into account data for a very long period of time, blah, blah. We're not here to talk about the why, but whether it still holds today, okay? If you want history, just go Google 4% rule FIRE, and I'm sure someone else has a much more extensive rant about that specific subject, right? I get worked up about this topic of whether the 4% rule is still safe enough because, well, I have a lot of time on my hands in my early retirement, and of course, as I've stated before, I still think about money quite a bit, right? I wouldn't quite say I worry about the subject, but it never really strays too far from my mind. And one of the primary reasons I make these rather mid at best videos is because, at least in terms of advice, I think the ones that I can give is simply superior to actual, at least in actual quality, to what can be gleaned from the actual financial journalism / media field. So yeah, anyway, if you are intrigued by what I might say, please subscribe, like, comment, share, and all that social media buzzwords, or whatever, okay? I'm rich enough for me, and I'll be great regardless. So, first, who's even saying that the 4% rule is still good or not good anymore, right? The answer is, of course, the completely worthless pile of crap that is the personal finance medium. Seriously, let's be clear, economists in general, they're not real scientists, and they have no idea what they're talking about 95% of the time, okay? They can't predict anything. If they could, all these calls for recessions would actually mean something. I mean, it's also not a real science because there's hardly any consensus on what, collection of data actually implies, right, in terms of what would happen. Can you think of any other scientific discipline where everyone pretty much disagrees on what conclusions should be reached with the same data? So according to the financial experts, what's the real safe withdrawal rate? Oh, there's no consensus at any level here, okay? If you ask a retirement advisor or of a big company, you better believe that they want you to think that you can never, ever, ever afford to retire, right? Because that's what's in their self-interest, not yours. After all, how will they con you out of a few percentage points of your portfolio for decades otherwise, right? While they're still failing to beat the market, okay? Of course, I find it extra amusing that opinion on the 4% rule can seesaw within even the past 5 years, right? From being claimed that it's dead on arrival to totally fine now. The reason is pretty obvious, right? These days, in 2024, interest rate is pretty high. I mean, it's hard to say that you cannot withdraw 4% from your portfolio if even your local high-yield savings account gives you more than 4%, okay? But interest rates can change in 6 months, or 1 year, or 5, or 10 years, right? And they do. They change all the time. So you know what that means, right? That means correspondingly there will always be personal finance media written by a bunch of morons who are not themselves retired, telling you that all the rules that you have to help make your own financial decisions should be thrown out the window, or go collect them from outside of the window and glue it back together, or anywhere in between. Yeah, just had this example happen, like literally in the past handful of years. So proof is in the pudding, right? But let's talk about whether the 4% rule is totally safe, right? Sounds like that's what I'm going with, right? But actually, my answer to this question is an obvious no. Nope. Nothing in life is guaranteed, okay? This rule is just in place to indicate for a withdrawal rate where the success rate is very, very high, right? I think the best way to look at the 4% rule, or any percentage withdrawal rule, is to look at how similar it is, how it mirrors the returns of the average stock market portfolio, right, over time. Average stock market return is around 11% actually when you ignore inflation, right? Some people might bitch that I'm ignoring inflation, but the reality is that inflation itself is an average at a country level. That's how we get our data, right? That means very little to people in individual circumstances, right? If you already own your home or vehicle and buy, quality goods, plenty of time inflation might not really touch you on a year-to-year basis, okay? But outside of that tangent, my point is 11% stock market return sounds great, but hardly any single historical year returns exactly at 11%. It's usually much higher or lower, so the volatility index is high for this particular data point, right? So think about it like that for your own withdrawal rate, right? On average, you can withdraw 4%, but because the market fluctuates a lot, does that mean that you should vary it from, let's say, 2% to 6% each year? Issue here, of course, that in early retirement, you need to withdraw to, just to fund your life, right? People are looking for a stable withdrawal rate. While you can mitigate the volatility index of relying on the market by simply holding multi-years worth of living expenses in cash, or really lean towards the lower side of how much you'd sell, even in a down market, right? Now, I get if you only withdraw 2%, on the very low end, wouldn't that be your safe withdrawal rate then? And then you would need a lot more money to get to FIRE, right? And both are kind of true, right? I mean, I'm a conservative guy, so I didn't FIRE until, I didn't FIRE as soon as I can live off of 4% of my net worth. I waited until I had multiples of my own FIRE, my lean FIRE number, actually. But on the other hand, just because you withdraw 2% in 1 year doesn't mean that it has to be that way every year. After all, let's say, you do the 2% when the market is down like 20-25%, but when it's up 25%, surely you'd feel pretty safe pulling, let's say, 6 or maybe even 8% that year, right? See how volatility works? It actually works both ways, right? I never hear people talk about, being able to adjust it upwards when market's actually up, right? So then my third point, why should anybody actually use 4% as a rule if I'm claiming it can be volatile to actually use? Well, that's simple, right? That's because we human beings at the end of the day, we like simple rules that are easy to remember, okay? The reality, of course, everyone's circumstances are different. Some people still have pensions. Other people are retiring so barely early that their Social Security payments can still fill a sizable hole, right? Like especially if you're, retiring in your late 50s or something like that, okay? Other people want to live it up when they don't have a job. Well, there are still other people who just want to read and be a hermit in early retirement, okay? My wife probably disagrees. But a single number and 4% binds us together. It's a guideline rather than a real rule, right? You have to determine how much risk tolerance you can take, okay? I mean, I stated earlier that I think not this rule, but really, I mean, not any rule is totally guaranteed, right? I think it's funny that one of the reasons that people use to not retire early is that they claim, well, they can't 100% guarantee income and the lifestyle they want in retirement yet, right? But the real, kicker is that none of them seem to realize that they cannot actually 100% guarantee the same income or lifestyle with their regular job either, right? Because at any moment they could get laid off or injured or all sorts of much less likely scenarios, but it's not 100%, right? So the lack of a guarantee really doesn't bother me because I don't choose to live in that world of fear all the time. So, in conclusion, should you stick to the 4% rule? I guess that depends on how deep into the FIRE rabbit hole you are already into, right? If you're not in the rabbit hole, I'm sure you don't think it's enough, okay? That's the majority of people in the United States. If you are, then I'm already preaching to the choir. Sometimes I think it's not really my job to convert anyone to FIRE, right? Because, I have a tiny voice in a tsunami of total crap financial advice, right? So what difference can I make? Thank God I'm rich, okay? I don't have to worry about the opinions of others as much, at least, right? So what do you guys think? Where are you on your FIRE journey? Would you stick to the 4% rule still? Or would you be swayed by the personal finance media and change your mind every 2 or 3 years? Anyway, cheers. À la prochaine.